All right, hello everyone. Welcome back. Thank you all so much for joining us for Left Bank Books presents Washington University alum and author Sara Flannery Murphy, who will discuss her new novel, Girl One. Murphy will be in conversation tonight with critically acclaimed author Julia Fine. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Sara and Julia, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. And our doors are open now for customers to come back inside, so you can walk in and find both of these beautiful books on our shelves right now. Well, actually not right now. We're closed right now. But tomorrow morning, come in. We are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you all so much for your support. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment at any point in time throughout the event. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. Our June calendar is packed with fantastic events for readers of all ages, all genres. About tonight's book, Girl One. Orphan Black meets Margaret Atwood in this twisty supernatural thriller about female power and the bonds of sisterhood. Josephine Morrow is Girl One, the first of 9 miracle babies conceived without male DNA, raised on an experimental commune known as the Homestead. When a suspicious fire destroys the commune and claims the lives of 2 of the homesteaders, the remaining girls and their mothers scatter across the United States and lose touch. Years later, Margaret Morrow goes missing, and Josie sets off on a desperate road trip, tracking down her estranged sisters who seem to hold the keys to her mother's disappearance. Tracing the clues Margaret left behind, Josie joins forces with the other girls, facing down those who seek to eradicate their very existence while uncovering secrets about their origins and unlocking devastating abilities they never knew they had. A spellbinding supernatural thriller, Girl One combines the provocative imagination of Naomi Alderman's The Power with the propulsive cinematic storytelling of a Marvel movie. In her electrifying new novel, Sara Flannery Murphy digs deep into women's extraordinary power and reveals an unassailable truth. So much strength lies in numbers. Kami Garcia, the author of Beautiful Creatures, says, a genre-defying, thought-provoking thriller that is impossible to put down. Girl One is an engaging, timely exploration of identity and the power women possess when they band together. Mindy Mejia, the author of Everything You Want Me to Be and Strike Me Down, says, Girl One flares into the world with genetic possibilities and a bold remaking of history. A speculative feminist thriller of the highest order, Girl One is fresh, boundless, and thought-provoking. Certain books and characters linger long after the final page. Josephine Morrow and her extraordinary journey is one you won't soon forget. And Lynn Fargo, the author of They Never Learn, says, Sara Flannery Murphy's Girl One is both a heart-pounding, binge-worthy thriller and a riveting exploration of creation, consent, and the power of sisterhood. Don't miss this compelling new entry to the feminist literary canon. Now, about tonight's speakers. Sara Flannery Murphy is the author of The Possessions and Girl One. She grew up in Arkansas, studied library science in British Columbia, and received her MFA in creative writing at Washington University in St. Louis. She now lives in Utah with her husband and their 2 sons. Tonight, Sara will be in conversation with Julia Fine. Julia is the author of the critically acclaimed debut, What Should Be Wild, which was shortlisted for both the Bram Stoker Superior First Novel Award and the Chicago Review of Books Award. She teaches writing in Chicago, where she lives with her husband and children. And now, without further ado, I would love to welcome to the screen Sara Flannery Murphy and Julia Fine. If you all would help me in giving them a very warm round of applause. Hello. We have a great audience already here, and and even a wow reaction. So, very excited audience. So I will pass off the conversation to you. I'm really excited to hear more about this book and to find out everything about you. Not really. Yeah. This is my third event of the day. I'm a little don't trust anything that comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, I am so excited to be here with you and to get to just pick your brain about this book. I feel like there's so much to unpack. Do you feel like that sort of covered it, the synopsis, the cover flap, or is there more that you feel like people should know before we jump in?
I feel like that covered it pretty well. If I tried to sum it up, I might end up rambling on too long. I think that was pretty good.
Yeah. So my first question for you is very broad, but I really want to know why parthenogenesis? Like, how did you become interested in it? Like, how did you sort of decide this is what I want to base my book around?
It was a pretty long journey. It started, it's an idea that I've had since before I wrote The Possessions. And it's just kind of been, one of those ideas that rattles around in your head.
And I guess for people watching too, parthenogenesis is the scientific term for having a baby without sperm. Is that how you would scientifically define it?
Yeah, like self-fertilization, the eggs are able to fertilize without the presence of sperm. So the resulting child only has DNA from the mother or the person who gives birth, essentially. Yeah, I don't honestly have much of a background in the sciences, which made writing this book very, very intimidating, because my whole life I've understood myself as somebody who's interested in the humanities, and the sciences kind of intimidate me. So I had to kind of circle around the idea and figure out how to approach it. It actually came from this class that I took while I was at my MFA program, and just reading about the history of reproduction, because it was this class that covered the history of the body, which is obviously a very, very broad topic. You can talk about quite a lot. And the history of reproduction was a huge, huge part of that. And I realized that I had come to my understanding of reproduction through a very contemporary lens, and that I understood the birds and the bees and kind of the basic science of what went on behind it. And this was not the case at all for quite a long time. And I was really struck by the fact that some of the early philosophers, researchers, scientists, and I mean, I have to respect them, because it would be difficult to figure out exactly what went into reproduction when you didn't have the medical technology. But so often the questions seem to be how are men the most important, or how is the father the most important part of this process, which I found frustrating, to put it mildly. And there was this idea that I encountered, and to be honest, probably wildly misinterpreted. But this idea that the father provides the humanity, the mother, the person with the uterus, is basically just providing a space for the child to grow, but the father is the one who makes a child human and imbues it with a soul. And thousands upon thousands of years later, I'm sitting there in a library reading it, and I was what? That would make an incredible origin story, for a child to be born with just a mother, and for that to be the origin of at the time I was really focused on the idea of monsters, werewolves and witches and vampires. And I think I did get to touch on that in the novel, but it developed from more of a fairy tale scenario into more of a superhero novel over time. So that is how I came to the subject of parthenogenesis. It's a really fascinating concept I've found, and I feel even people who aren't directly interested in it, the whole idea of virgin birth feels like something that kind of permeates so much of like our understanding of how we get here. So I was worried, I was nervous about writing a book with virgin birth at its core, because it's not like the most marketable subject, to put it mildly. But I hope that in the end I was able to approach it in a way that's a little more accessible and a little more interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, I find it interesting and accessible regardless, but I definitely think, no, so is there this is again my lack of science knowledge showing too, were there actual researchers, because you said it, the book is sort of mostly set in the 90s, but then there's parts of it that are set in the 70s, which is when Dr. Bellinger, who's sort of the father figure, if even if he's not biologically sort of doing anything, that's when he's doing this research, when all the research is being done. And was there anything like in the cults or research or actual historical things that you were drawing on when you were building the homestead, or was it all just sort of like what would happen if, and you built it from there?
There were some actual cases that I was able to draw into the novel, which was amazing. I think Gregory Pincus, who I think he was working back in the 1940s, and I really do share his story in the middle, which I don't know if it kind of throws people off, because
the rats.
I think it was with rabbits. Yeah,
rabbits. Okay.
He was. Yeah, but it was like he really did end up kind of at the center of like a controversial storm, because he induced virgin birth in lab rabbits, and people were just like, no, thank you. And then he went on to really be like a co-creator of the birth control pill. So, I mean, he gave the world some amazing things. So I thought about him, and of course had to nod to him in the book because his work was very influential. There have also been, I think that in the 70s, and I don't know too much about these groups because I was only able to find like very few resources about them. And I felt like, well, maybe if I can't find that much about them, maybe they don't want to be talked about a lot. But I think in the early 70s, there were groups of women who were very sincerely like trying to figure out if this could be a viable option. And I think I found that out after I had already started writing, which was one of those really nice moments when like you've been building something, like spinning it together in your head, and then you look into it and you're like, oh, like this is not as far-fetched as I thought. Like now that I look into it, like there are examples in the real world. So I think there have been surprisingly like quite a few. There was also a search for a virgin birth in the UK in the 1950s, which ended up drawing quite a few mother-child pairs who thought that they might be like that their children might be the products of virgin birth. So it has kind of been a topic of interest in like both very serious and maybe more underground ways throughout like time, like recently and in the past.
Yeah, because I found it so interesting. It seemed like, I mean, so initially, the book is about Josie's search for her mother, and obviously if it was 2021 and she like could go on Facebook and like message all of the women, it would be really different. So like clearly like there's the practical considerations for setting it in the 90s and then having sort of the origin be in the 70s, but also just from a sort of history of feminism perspective, I found it so interesting because we get to meet the daughters who are sort of products of the 80s and 90s. And then we meet the mothers who are products of the 60s and 70s, and both are sort of battling different like patriarchal and social problems. And like, obviously there's also the added thing of like, oh, virgin births and being in the news and, who's after it and things like that. But it also felt like they're just like sort of social, sort of the way that they responded to things. And I'm thinking, of just like, as Josie goes to find her mother, she meets all of these women and they're vastly different from one another, but they all sort of are battling that same thing. Did you have that in mind in terms of like second wave feminism and things like that as you were writing? Or was it much more of a, like, I'm just gonna write it and not, worry about philosophizing or like the history of that sort of thing?
I did think about it a lot. I'm not sure, it was a story with like a lot going on. And one thing I struggle with as a writer is sort of like tossing everything in and then having to be like, you know what, I need to like do justice to some ideas by pulling back from others. But I think I think the idea of mothers and daughters being parts of different generations, but still facing the same challenges and still seeing daughters having to face these echoes of things that you fought for when you were young. Like, I wish that didn't have a real world parallel, but it very, very much does. So it was difficult to write about mothers and daughters without having a little bit of that, even if they hadn't had this very bizarre origin story that kind of put them at the center of a certain focus that a lot of mothers and daughters won't face. I think that would have just kind of naturally come into their interactions, like what you want for your daughters and the world that they end up being in anyway, despite your best efforts.
Do you want to read a little bit sort of before we keep talking? I know you had talked about wanting to read sort of that initial moment of sort of introducing us to the mother-daughter relationship, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to start with chapter 2, which is when we first hear from Josie, the narrator. I learned about my mother's disappearance from the evening news. I looked up from my textbook when I overheard my surname and recognized the exact cypress tree that grew outside my bedroom window. From that point on, my life turned into a stream of simple equations. How long my mother had been missing, one day. How long since I'd had an actual conversation with her, just over a year. The cost of a bus ticket back to Coeur d'Alene, my adopted hometown, $15. The amount left in my bank account after spending $15, $110.67. How doomed I would be if I abandoned Chicago for longer than 3 nights. Very. I had 4 exams looming within the next few weeks. For a while, I lost myself in these calculations and the illusion of stability they offered. This was my standard coping mechanism, turn everything into problems on a checklist to be neatly solved, filed away. If I pulled it off just right, I could focus on the question of how many pairs of jeans to pack, 3, and keep my growing panic at bay. But when I arrived back in Coeur d'Alene, Illinois, heart of the lake with no lake and no discernible heart, I stood in front of the shell of my childhood home in the balmy twilight, and everything in me crumpled. Something bad had happened here. Something bad had happened again, and this time it involved my mother. I'm actually going to hop ahead a tiny bit to the part where she actually talks more about her origin story. Each year of my life revolved around 2 particular dates, an emotional arc as fixed in my head as the rotation of the earth around the sun. The first came on April 24th, the anniversary of one of the most controversial scientific breakthroughs in the 20th century, my birthday, a date that had become a question in Trivial Pursuit and the title of a little-known song by The Clash. The second date landed in June, the anniversary of the fire that had taken everything from me. Together, those 2 formed the simple punchline of my origin story. It might have been birth that put us on the map, but it was death that kept us there. Since first grade, I could recite my personal history on command, and often did, for anybody who'd listen. In the year 1970, the shiny start of a new decade, a visionary named Joseph Bellinger put out the call for young women to become part of a risky reproductive experiment. Between 1971 and 1975, 9 women gave birth to baby girls. There were no fathers, not genetically, not biologically, only eggs dividing, impossibly. The 9 of us, swiftly dubbed the Miracle Babies, launched Bellinger from crackpot obscurity to global fame. For 6 bright years, there were photo shoots, interviews, limited edition baby dolls, conference presentations, sponsorships, endless editorials. Bellinger stayed with us at the homestead as much as possible, doing his best to protect us both from the shine of the spotlight and the inevitable darkness that collected at its edges. By my 6th birthday, the darkness started to overwhelm the shine. The people who opposed our very existence got louder, more aggressive. Our most prominent critic was a man named Ricky Peters, a preacher whose fame grew alongside ours, but Ricky wasn't the only one. Politicians publicly promised that if elected, they make Parthenogenesis illegal. Ministers and priests took to the pulpits to remind the world that we were born Pre-damned, petri dish abominations, our eternal souls only half-formed when we were conceived without fathers. In 1977, everything fell apart, one disaster after another. Lilia, Mother 9, the last to give birth, was the first to die. She left her 2-year-old daughter, Fiona, orphaned in every sense of the word. Doctors around the globe snagged TV appearances and front-page spots to argue that Bellinger's methods were clearly dangerous, illicit, and untested. Some mothers fled the homestead, taking their miracle babies with them. Our makeshift family fractured and scattered until barely any of us were left. And then the fire. Probably going to stop there.
Yay. Oh, this book is so good. Just to like nerd out a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of questions still for you, but I guess to stay on the topic of like mothers and daughters, and especially when you end sort of with that heartbreaking idea of like how orphaned you are if you have only a mother and your mother dies. But can you talk a little bit about how like your own experience as a mother influenced the book, both in like writing the content of it, but also just like the logistics of parenting? You have small children, writing a book. Can you just talk a little bit about your experiences on both those ends?
Yeah, of course. In terms of actually writing the book with small children, that is a very tricky process. I was thinking back to my first launch when I had my debut published back in 2017, and I was like, oh yeah, back then I think I was actually pregnant when that book came out, which turned out to be logistically really helpful because my second child at that point was like a fetus, and he was very, very quiet and very portable. Well, and now he's like a 3-year-old, and he is like not quiet and not very portable. So yeah, writing as a parent is, I think, just a process of grabbing whatever time I can. I would love to be able to have like a writing ritual. I would love to have like a candle to light, or, you know, a certain song to hear to get me like in the writing mood. But I feel like I've had to kind of train myself to just grab whatever time I can, whatever time presents itself to me. And if that means that I'm just sitting there like with, I don't know, what show? I'm trying to think of what show they watch, and my mind is completely blanked. If I'm sitting there with like cartoons jangling in the background, you know, writing an intense scene, that's what happens. I also feel like, and I always feel a little bad saying this, but I think it's kind of important that sometimes I'm a worse parent because I'm also writing. And I think I just have to kind of accept that a little bit, that I'm not going to be able to be an amazing parent and an amazing writer. Like it has to be this constant push-pull and this constant sacrifice.
Also like a reevaluation of what it means to be an amazing parent, because like your kid sees that you just published a book and like have a career. And I feel like that, you know, even if like sort of on like for Instagram influencers doesn't necessarily count as like, you know, did you XYZ your kid today, like in the long run, you know?
Yeah, I do. I need to get rid of that mindset. But it's easy to feel like very like self-berating, I guess, when you aren't fully focusing on your children 100% of the time. Like writing Girl One, in terms of bringing that relationship onto the page, it's kind of interesting because I feel like I was writing it so much from the perspective of a daughter versus a mother. And maybe it's because we see Josie more as, she's like turning 23 like over the course of the book. So she's in her early 20s, and I only have experience as a parent with really young kids. You know, my oldest son is only 8 right now. So I feel so familiar with the process of taking care of young children. And I love reading books, I mean, like yours, which cover so many different aspects of what it's like to be a parent to a newborn, or, you know, books that cover what it's like to be parents to toddlers and school-age children. But when it comes to parenting 20 somethings, I feel like I don't have that personal experience. And so maybe still my imagination moves more into the role of like the adult child. And I thought a lot about my own relationship with my mom. And one of the themes, I always hate saying one of the themes, I don't know why. One of the things that I really try to cover is the way that we can look at our mothers as these people who are sort of the background figures or the people that you grow beyond. And they get, I think, just such a bad reputation and not really celebrated enough beyond like Mother's Day, you know, and that kind of like, oh, thank you so much for sacrificing everything. But not as much of a recognition of like, yeah, it's like, it's a frustrating kind of recognition. So I wanted to explore like how Josie came to see her mother in a different light. And that's something that I've also gone through. And I assume will continue going through, you know, as my relationship with my own mother develops, as we both continue to age, you know, like how do I look back at how I saw her in my 20s? Like, in what ways did I underestimate her? In what ways did I feel like I had to choose a life that was different than hers? So I really was so much in a daughter mindset when I wrote it, more than a mother mindset, I think.
But that in its own way, though, does so much justice to mothers of older daughters too, I think, right?
I hope so, yeah.
I definitely felt, you know, I think there is a danger, like you said, in a book like this, especially that is so like propulsive and we move so quickly. I think there's a danger of like, you know, the young people are the stars, but we really get to know not just Josie's sisters, but all of the other women who were with her mother and who, like the mothers of these sisters. And they feel, just to me at least, just as fully formed and sort of, they have needs and wants and, you know, good and bad qualities too, in the same way as the younger women, which I think is something we don't always see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that came across, you know, because I was hoping that I had enough mothers on the page that some of them would be portrayed like as a little more flawed and some of them would be portrayed in more, you know, forgiving ways, but that they would all feel complex and they would all sort of have their reasons for what they did. And yeah, I wanted to respect that too, because I don't know, I'm in my 30s now and I feel like I'm in this like strange cusp between like being young and old. And I know how women, as they age, you know, you can just feel like this sort of fog of invisibility like coming towards you. Not that it's inevitable at all, but that like people try, that maybe you'll have to fight harder to be seen or to be heard or to be taken seriously and not just painted as like an invisible character. So I really did want the mothers to be portrayed in a light where you could see all their complexity.
Well, I certainly think you succeeded. I have so many questions. I'm trying to time it all out. Can you talk a little bit about, because we've covered sort of the thematic, the like philosophical, the scientific stuff, but this also is a book that's very plot driven and very like carefully plotted step by step. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your plotting process? And there are, not to give anything away, but there are a lot of plot twists and a lot of things that like Josie assumes that turn out to be other things. What's your process like in putting that together? Do you know at the beginning, oh yeah, this is what's actually happening? Do you discover it along with her? Can you just talk about sort of structure and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I'm not great at it. It's one of my biggest struggles. I love plot-driven books. I love plot-driven books, but I don't feel like I'm naturally good at it as much as anybody is naturally good at it, I guess. I did end up having to make a lot of outlines for this book. You know, throughout the process, I would write a little bit, then write an outline. Some of the aspects were big surprises to me, like especially some of the later twists. And sometimes I would try to, I don't know, pull back from a certain twist and it would kind of wreck the structure of the novel. So it was just a process of like trying to see where it slowed down a little bit and wondering if there was something that she could discover or something that could get her to question her loyalties, because I feel like one of the trickiest things about it is that you have like this emotional arc and you need to kind of have the external events like over it. And for Josie, I always had like a really clear idea of what I wanted her emotional arc to be. You know, I knew that I wanted her to begin in a certain mindset and slowly, or quickly, I guess, because the book really only takes place over like a few weeks. So pretty quickly, she's able to come to these realizations and change her mindset, change her attitude towards some incredibly key things in like her view of the world and herself and her mother and everything she knows about her origin story. So I was probably letting the external plot points really take a back seat, because that's kind of a funny way to phrase it since it's a road trip, but yeah, take like a back seat to the like to just to the emotional journey that I wanted her to go on. I am a very random kind of scattered plotter. It's something that I'm constantly trying to work on and get better at. But in the end, I always do find myself just kind of diving back into it and seeing what works and going from there. So it's kind of a mix. It's like little outlines that probably only I understand because they're all written in like weird frenetic code, because I feel like I'll get the ideas and I'll kind of, you know, be like walking along or driving along or something and suddenly be able to see very clearly how it should pan out. And I feel like I have to write it down, because I've learned that if I think to myself like, oh, I'll just remember this, of course, like it's so important, how could I forget it? And then like an hour later, I have no idea. So it's kind of a frenetic process.
Mm-hmm. Well, for this book, that makes a lot of sense because there is so much, you know, and the energy of it too is kind of frenetic, just in like in a really good way, as a compliment. Did you always have? So, for those who have not yet read, there are excerpts of like news articles and letters and journal entries from sort of around the time of Josie's birth, and then most of the book is told in first person in the 90s, sort of from her modern day perspective. Did you always know that you wanted to include those sort of artifacts, or was that something that came later on?
I think that was included pretty early on in drafts. I wanted a way to include like exposition and to include her background without her having to carry it all as a narrator, because I think that can be very, very hard on a narrator to have to carry that much.
Yeah.
So I felt like those were good ways to give readers a glimpse and let them draw their own conclusions without having to have Josie explain absolutely everything. And since her life as Girl One was so, like it was at the center of so much media attention and there was so much written about her, and because her mother was pretty tight-lipped about the history, she didn't get to learn her history from her mother. She would have learned it through like, you know, newspapers she dug up in the library archives or TV spots that came on late at night. So I thought that having those elements wound through kind of helped the reader learn Josie's history in the same way that she would have learned it herself. So it felt very natural to the book. And they were actually a lot of fun to write. I really loved writing pretty much every excerpt I have in there. I would try to read like old magazines and books from like, they aren't really old, but like I would try to read back issues, I should say, from like the 70s or even from the 90s, because sometimes the way they talked was so different. There's like an excerpt in there from like Rolling Stone, like an interview with Josie. And I think I read like a Rolling Stone interview with Sharon Stone that was from 1994. That was, or maybe it was 1993, but it was like I was like, this would never, I don't think that this would fly right now. Not that 2021 is like perfect, but I don't think that people would be up for this now. So I tried to capture all that.
Yeah, no, I appreciated it for sure. And I really love too the way, because those are sort of objective artifacts almost. As a reader, you sort of come at it with Josie in the beginning, and then like once you learn new information, you can sort of flip back and be like, wait, I read it this way, but now that I know, this piece of information. So I always love a good sort of like Easter egg treasure hunt type thing, and I feel like your book has so many of them. Can you talk a little? We have a few more minutes, 5 more minutes, I guess, before audience questions. But can you talk? So the back cover copy for this book talks about like Margaret Atwood and Orphan Black. Can you talk a little bit about some of your influences, particularly your literary influences while writing?
Oh yeah, definitely. Geek Love was a huge one for me. It's like my.
I totally see it. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's such a weird, distinct book, and I feel like in my early 20s, I would always find books just by like looking at library or bookstore shelves, which seems a little weird to me now because now I hear about books, from so many different directions. But back then I would just like walk along, and if I saw a book, a spine that looked interesting, I was like, I'll check it out. And that's how I stumbled across Geek Love. Like I went in completely not knowing what it was about. And it was a very wild ride. And I think that idea of like the parents purposefully wanting to have children who are extraordinary in some way, and like the way that it affects them, and like this huge influence that parents, in that case, it was like 2 different parents, can have over the direction of your life and who you are. So that was like a huge influence on me. The Power, of course, I think that one came out not too long ago, but it came out in 2017 because that was just when my debut was, like all the events for that were dying out a little bit, and I was starting to focus on my next book, which was like a very weird transition to go from publishing a book to writing again. So when that came out, I read it, and it was like an incredible inspiration to get to see what I wanted to do with this book in another book. The way sometimes when you read a book, you can just be like, yes, like I think I can do this because somebody else has shown me the way a little bit, which is an exciting moment. So those were 2 of the biggest ones.
So now that this book is out, what are you working on now? Or if you don't want to talk about it, if you're one of those people who's like, this is sacred until it's ready, feel free to skip the question, but I am curious.
No, I'm usually very, very weirdly private with my books when I'm writing them, and like I feel like I'm trying to move beyond that because I would like people to have some sense of what's happening like before literally publication day. This time I'm writing a book set in the Arkansas Ozarks, which is where I grew up I lived there as a teenager and visited there a lot as like a 20-something. And it's just it's a very strange, it's kind of geographically isolated, and it feels like this slightly like mystical, odd place to me. So I'm writing about a group of friends who stumble across these houses in an Ozarks mountain town that possess weird powers. Like they're powers again, but this time it's houses instead of people. And we follow them as they explore these houses, and then 15 years later, after a mysterious tragedy has taken place, and they are coming back to the town for the first time. After something bizarre has happened that has echoes of what happened back 15 years ago. So it's been a really fun book to write so far. I'm really enjoying it. I know that a book can come apart at any moment and I might start hating it, but I'm just letting myself love it for now because I know it's I'm
already sold, so.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
So I know Shane had said we have a lot of audience questions. Should we welcome him back?
Yeah. Hi, I'm back. Really fantastic conversation. Like, I have long been a fan of you, Sara, and really just thrilled with you, Julia, like in this conversation. And I did not expect it to go in all these directions, so I'm very thankful that you are such a brilliant conversation partner.
Yeah.
Let's get to some of the audience questions, and then I have a few of my own as well, because like I'm just so curious of, like, So excited. Start off with a comment. We have Christina saying hi from the Chicago burbs, so up in your neck of the woods, Julia. But let's start with a question from Katie. So Katie says, hi. Sara, you said this is a book with a lot going on, and you had to pull back from some ideas in order to do others justice. How did you hone in on what would be the dominant themes of the book and what got left behind?
Ooh, that's going to be tricky to answer. That's a wonderful question. I think one of the big breakthroughs for me came when I realized that Margaret should be missing. Before that, I was kind of trying to cram all these ideas into the book, and it felt very dormant and like a little too navel-gazing in a way. And having Margaret missing, just on a very basic level, gave it a lot of momentum and urgency, because it was a wonderful reason for Josie to need to look into her past. So that, and now I'm like trying to think what I left behind. I think sometimes when I discard ideas, like I just kind of cut them loose so entirely that I'm like, I'm never going to think of you again. And it's hard, like after a long project, to remember exactly what I left behind. I mean, like I said, the road trip and the missing mom were a huge part of it. And I believe in some of the early drafts, like Margaret had just died instead, which was not working. So that's something I definitely left behind, and I'm glad I did, because the story it was just like I was rewriting the first chapter over and over again in that like kind of miserable stage you get into when you're trying to make it work and it's just not working, but you can't admit it to yourself for reasons of ego and stubbornness. So that was one that I had to kind of just let go. Yeah, that was a great question.
Prepare for some more, because we have a question from the fantastic Catherine Davis. Yes, I'm assuming it's the Catherine Davis. Like,
Yeah,
I'm just making assumptions.
I would think so.
It could be another Catherine Davis that I have no idea and have never met. But Catherine asks, has your mother read the book? And if so, what was her response to it?
She has not read it yet. No, I actually dedicated the book to both of my parents because I just really, really wanted to dedicate a book to them. And on my publication day, like they both sent me texts saying that they were crying over it, which was very, very sweet. I come from a very emotional family. So my mom, I think my dad is reading it right now, and my dad is probably the one I'm like a little more nervous about. I don't know exactly how he's going to react, but he's a lovely, supportive dad, so I'm sure it will be a good reaction no matter what. I don't know what my mom would say about it yet, but yeah, that's going to be an intense reaction as well. So I will be sure to share publicly when my mom has finished reading it, and I will let you know that I'll be sharing it.
Yeah. Randy asks, how did you get to know Josephine during the writing process?
She was a tricky character to write. She actually changed quite a lot late in the game, because in the first draft, and I mean not just in the first draft, but literally in the draft that I think we sent out to publishers and to editors, she had a different power, and she did not have like her ability to like control minds. And that's something that came when I was working with my editor at MCD, Daphne. She thought that Josie just needed to be a little more like present on the page, and giving her that power and letting her grapple with all the questions that rise from the fact that she has this this ability to literally control people. And she also struggles with like her adoration of Bellinger, and she can be kind of an arrogant character, which I love, but is also something that I think we all kind of need to grapple with in ourselves. She really came to life and just had to make a lot of different choices. I just went through the book and tried to look at spots where I'd let her be led along by the plot. And I was just like, no, she needs to actively choose this. She needs to think it through. And I think in once I did that, she became such a more complex and difficult character, and I really came to love her a lot. I struggle with narrators because they have to carry so much of the book, and yeah, that makes them kind of tricky to get to know as people in a kind of vulnerable way. But yeah, that one change really helped me understand her a lot.
Katie, in response to her question, said, fascinating how the missing mom road trip weren't initially a part of it. So, and I'm actually kind of fascinated by that too. Like that's...
Yeah, it fascinates me too.
I have a question for both of you, and I love talking about genre, and especially since both of you are seemingly like trying to bend and break and like destroy and create new genre. I'm wondering if you have thought about what genre you think it fits into most, or if you're just like, don't care, it's fiction, love it. Like,
I think about genre a lot. It's like I have a really strong love-hate relationship with genre, more than anyone probably should. Yeah, I do kind of just approach books, and I just write them the way that I want them to unfold. And I do really love plot-driven books in a lot of ways. I mean, not exclusively. Some of the books that I absolutely love have basically no plot at all, just to make things more interesting. But I did want this book to have a lot happening, and so I was trying to bring in some elements of thriller. And of course, it has a lot of elements of sci-fi as well. I find that if I think too much about genre while I'm writing, I don't know if you find this too, Julia, but it can really trip me up, because it can really be an obstacle in the way of the story and make me think too much about certain conventions instead of just like letting it happen. So yeah, I think about it a lot, but it's a tricky question.
Yeah. Sorry, I was not expecting to answer questions tonight. I have come to see genre as more of like a way to have a conversation than necessarily like a way to follow rules, which I think has worked really well for me in my writing process. And so like to think about Girl One, it definitely feels, I mean, to me, there are things about it that remind me of like Severance by Ling Ma, or trying to think what's the other, for some reason only pandemic books are coming to mind. What's the
Station 11?
Station 11, yeah, just books where it's like an alternate, almost an alternate history, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because there's so much grounded in reality here, and the thing that you're changing feels much more of a like philosophical shift to me. And like obviously then there's elements of like the road trip novel, and like you get to then think of all the road trips that you love and the road trip books that you love, and sort of see how this one stacks up next to it. But I definitely think, I mean, I would call it literary fiction. Because I think, you know, I'm not sure. But I do love in general what Sara does. I mean, the Possessions, I just like fell head over heels with it, because it was, here's a book where it's using the speculative elements to look at this big sort of philosophical question of like grief and, you know, how we lean on each other and how strangers support us, and like how much of, you know, our past we want. I don't know, there's all of these large philosophical questions that I think like is what literature in the novel is for. And so Sara is like, okay, well, how can I use like not necessarily more accessible, but sort of more fun, more like intense, you know, elements to access those feelings. And so that's where I would put your books. That's what I hope that I'm trying to do as well. But I'm not sure how anyone in different genres would feel about those answers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your books do that as well. I mean, like The Upstairs House, like taking horror to explore the postpartum experience was I mean, still like one of my favorite things I've ever read. It's just an incredible merging. Yeah, and I think it makes books a lot more exciting. And I think we're kind of in an age right now where it feels like a lot of an age. I don't know. We're in like, I don't know. Right now, it feels like a lot of people are publishing kind of genre bending books. At least I look around and I see that a lot. That more people are just kind of taking aspects from this or taking aspects from that and just letting them kind of mix together and create sort of weird, beautiful new things. And I personally love it. I mean, I can't get enough of like books that are defined as genre bending. They're pretty much always amazing to me.
I think from my experience, it's not that they haven't been written before, but it's that they haven't been captivating the national attention like they are now. So, like, genre has been doing incredible things and doing things that are mind-bending and like, but they've been very much under the radar.
Yeah.
And now with like, thankfully with like Naomi Alderman's The Power, kind of taking that, like, is this a post-apocalyptic book? Is this a feminist book? Is this a mystery? Is this sci-fi? Like, what is this book? Is it historical fiction? Like, I mean, just so many, like, is it question marks? And really just saying, doesn't matter. Read this book. It's fantastic. And people from outside the genre can read it and love it. And because, I mean, we put that in sci-fi, and I still have like my like, does it really? Does it go there? And
Yeah.
both of your books are in hardcover, new
I
fiction.
don't know. This is going to sound so ridiculous, probably to both of you, but like reading the driving scenes in this book, the road trip stuff, I thought of Robert Penn Warren, All the King's Men. There's a scene where the character drives from like what is he, in Louisiana to California, and like I automatically was like, oh, that's like my road trip go-to. So like I'd be like, oh, Sarah's in conversation with Robert Penn Warren. Like it's really not what you're trying to do at all. But I think the getting rid of these false sort of binaries of like it has to be a book about this or it has to be a book about that, or you can only enjoy sort of this or that. I think we're starting to do that. I hope we do more.
I want road trip to be a genre, like a full genre that takes up like a bookshelf, because it is it's one of my favorite genres of movie, and it's one of my favorite genres of book too. So yeah. Because Sarah, do you know Anne Valente?
I have read her work, but I don't know her personally.
Yeah. Okay. She was also from St. Louis and has since left and is now somewhere else. But her most recent novel was also a road trip story, and also just like, I mean, very almost like not sci-fi, like definitely not in that genre, but also like kind of playing with genre and like, is it a mystery? Is it a road trip? Is it a grief novel? Like, it's so much going on, and also incorporating the artifacts, and I love that element of like fiction. So like, yeah.
Well, I love too, Sarah, how you said you just sort of look at what the book needs. I don't know if you said it in so many words, but in talking about sort of like plotting or genre or trying to do like, what does this particular project need? And I feel like that's such a good way to approach it, because obviously, you know, you're not writing like a thriller, like you're writing this particular book about this particular thing. And so like, if these elements benefit it, use them. And if they don't, like you said, throw them away. So
yeah, exactly. I think each book kind of has its own demands a little bit. Like, not to be like, I don't want to make it sound as if the book writing process is like something that comes to me from some other place, because it is like a lot of hard work. But I think you can kind of sense what each book needs at a certain point, and like what, you know, if you hold back because you're worried about genre or about anything else, it's probably going to hurt the book a little bit at a certain stage. So I just try to go for what each book seems to require.
Do either of you get any pushback from your editors? I mean, they might be watching, so I don't know if you want to, but like, I feel like in the editing process, there's always that like wanting it to fit somewhere that they can market and sell. And I wonder if you got any pushback from editors of like, maybe we could make it more.
I don't think I have. No, I think I've worked with 2 editors, and both of them have been really, really open to the speculative elements. I mean, Daphne, I think, who was my editor for Girl One, was just like, she just like fully embraced it from the first conversation I had with her, and was just so on board with, I mean, I think her notes, I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was something like, make it even wilder, make it bigger. She was a huge cheerleader for the strange elements of it. So, she kind of gave me free reign, which was nice. I didn't have any pushback.
Yeah, I had the same editor for both of my books. And she very much was like, this is what this book is. Here's where you should push. Like this, you could pull back, but not because it's genre, just because I'm a good editor and I'm telling you what to do. But I think the issue is much, at least for me, and if you can say there even is an issue, I do think it is harder when you have a book where like, well, where is it on the bookshelf? Where can someone find it? If I like to read this kind of book, well, I also like this kind of book. And when you're writing sort of outside of those things, I think from a marketing perspective, it gets trickier. But my editor at Harper always was like, you're doing what you're doing. And my agent has always said, like, that's who you are. And that's like why we acquired these books. So.
And that's why we trust blurbs, because when you find a fantastic author that you love who has incredible blurbs on the back of a book where you're just like, what is this? I'm just like, I'll try it. I'll do it. Let's go. Yeah.
Sarah blurbed my first book. It was so kind of her.
It's such a good book. It's a really, really good book. Yeah. What Should Be Wild and The Upstairs House are both amazing. And I feel like What Should Be Wild plays a lot with like fairy tale tropes too, and like more gothic tropes, and it's amazing. So both your books are kind of genre bending in different ways, which is cool to see.
As are yours. And it sounds like the third one will be too.
I hope so. Yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions from the audience, but we have a little bit of time left. Anything else you want to chat about? Like what you're reading now, or like?
Yeah, what are you reading now?
What am I reading now? Oh, I think I'm reading Gold Diggers right now. I'm trying to like balance, and I'm loving it so far. And the funny thing is I'm probably like 15% into it and just really, really love it. And I didn't even realize that it had any speculative elements, but I think I read like a blurb or a review of it that says that it has speculative elements coming in later. And I was like, it made it even more exciting, because the writing is already so engaging and just really funny and cool. So knowing that I can look forward to something speculative as well is kind of thrilling.
What about you, Julia?
Me. I am almost done with The Atmospherians by Alex McElroy, and it's such a hoot. They're so funny. It's just it's a book about a cult. It's another cult book, actually. I'm in cult book mode. It's a book about this like disgraced Instagram influencer who with her friends starts this cult to sort of reform gross men. It's really funny. And then I'm also reading a book that's coming out in 2 years, next year. It's called Four Treasures of the Sky by Jenny Zhang, and it's about a Chinese woman who's kidnapped in the mid-19th century and sort of goes on about the ways that she sort of reinvents herself in the U.S., I guess. But there's also a speculative element and sort of a ghost story to it. So yeah, recommend them both.
Yeah. I've heard really good things about The Atmospherians. Yeah, I'm really, really curious to read it because it sounds like my kind of book.
I found it through Twitter because I follow Alex on Twitter and they're hilarious. And I started reading it thinking like, I really hope this is as funny as like Twitter personality, because you never know. Like, I feel like maybe I try to be funny on Twitter and you read my books and you're like, oh no. But no, it does this very nice balancing act of being really, really funny, but also having a lot of like philosophical deep things to say. So always impressive with that.
Yeah, that's an amazing balance.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. You should read it.
I'm definitely going to.
You both, I think, would really like this book. Do you know Becky Chambers?
No.
So Becky Chambers has like 4 books in a series. Pretty like, I think you would have to say they are sci-fi. But this is her new book, A Psalm for the Wild Built, and it is just so good. And it comes out, in July. So sooner than I thought. But it's like deeply meditative and something that I thought was just like the thing that I would have wanted in college or like in high school, college, that would have set me on a path of reading all just like speculative fiction, like wild, like inventive, creative things. And instead I had to go through college and read like stodgy, like these are the classics. And then I got out of college and it's like mysteries. But now I'm falling into sci-fi, and like it's also from the company Macmillan, Sara, your publisher. But it's really just beautiful and like kind of very timely, and highly recommend it. So it's a novella, so it's a short little read, but it comes out in July.
Nice. I'm gonna look out for it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And there are robots, like robots that practice meditation. Like it's so good. Well, we have now surpassed the hour, and I just want to thank both of you. It's been really great to spend time with you, to chat books, to hear all about your fantastic book, Sara. I'm gonna post a link in the comments again for how to order signed copies, and that is there. And we do also have Julia's book on our shelves now, and you can order both at the same time. It would be absolutely fantastic way to support Left Bike Books, and we would love that.
Thank you. Congratulations, Sara. It's such a wonderful book. Happy launch week.
Thank you.
It's just at the edge of pandemic launch.
I know it's an awkward time.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. It really means a lot.
And next time you're both in St. Louis, like, let's meet up. Let's have some
for sure.
chat and sign some books and all that jazz. So
yeah.
All right. Well, have a great evening, audience. Thank you so much for being here tonight. You are fantastic. Remember to follow us on Facebook and YouTube to find out about all of our fantastic virtual events. So have a good night, everyone.